Before I get into the video, our Patreon page is going to launch in 1 week. So this Patreon page is going to open the door to lots of opportunities for Animator Guild to grow. And you guys have the opportunity to influence how it grows and what you'd like to see us make next. Last week I sent you guys a survey that you can take. Some of the suggestions we've got are things like an Animator Guild hardback book. So that's something that we're now looking into, and maybe that will be a goal. Some of you have said that you'd be really excited to have more community projects such as tournaments and collaborative animations that we all make together. And some of you have said that you want to see more tutorials, more animation fundamentals videos, for example. Some of you have said sound effects, that would be really interesting. And some of you want more live streams. So these are all things that we are considering, and they're going to become Patreon goals, so that if we reach a certain amount on Patreon, they will start to be a thing that we make. So right now you guys have the ability to influence how this Patreon page works, how Animator Guild is going to grow. So make use of this opportunity and let me know how you feel about the whole thing, what kind of preferences you have. Go into the description, click the link, and it will take you to the survey. The Patreon page will be launching in 1 week. So mark it in your calendars, get ready, and yeah, enjoy the video, guys. Hey guys, today I'm going to be animating a scene that currently is in the storyboard phase, or the animatic phase you might want to call it. So we've got a small amount of time. We've got this action before it, which is just rough animation. Then we've got this still image, and then this image, and then the next scene. So we're going to swap this image out with an animated piece. We're going to animate this and make it move, basically. So what I've done here is I've got it on one frame in the timeline. It's already in its own symbol. So we click into this and we've got it on, we've got the drawing on one frame, and then we've got the next shot on the other, because they kind of flow into one another. So we have a small amount of space here. So I'm going to give myself a little bit more space to work, and I can do that just by going into this layer. And I've got this now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate it so that we always have the source image that we are working off, and that's not going to change. So I always like to back up my work as well, so that in the event that I make a decision that I want to take back, I always have a backup just ready on hand. I don't have to reload any versions or anything like that. So now pay attention to what I'm about to do, and we'll take it from here. So I have a duplicate here, and I'm going to turn off the underlayer, so we're just working with a duplicate now. And what we want to do is, this is a storyboard that's mid motion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the before and after of this frame, and that's going to give me a base for my animation for me to work off of. So I'm going to make a keyframe here, I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to make a keyframe there. So we've got this in the middle, and then we're going to draw our before and our after. Very simple. Turn on our onion skin so we can see a ghost of the frame ahead of us, and then we're going to just very roughly draw out our pose. So if I'm thinking about it, right, this chord, I'm imagining it stretching on for a long time. So if I'm thinking about, let's say the pivot, let's say that we are at the bottom here, and the frame is like here. So with that, we are not going to be we're going to be moving very steadily here, so it's not going to be a lot of up down motion because we're almost at the bottom here, and the pivot is very high up. So I'm taking that into consideration when I'm drawing this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cheat a little bit here and just draw out certain parts of the body that are going to remain consistent. and that's just going to help us keep everything in proportion. Just going to skew this now. It's a quick fix. So in the swing, the legs are kind of catching up with his upper torso here, but we're drawing the before of that. So the clothes are going to be flapping about. They're going to be acting very randomly because they are moving faster than the frame rate. So for them, I'm just going to draw them in afterwards. Of course, with the storyboard version, I've already drawn them out because I wanted to just get an idea in still of what they're going to look like. But they're going to vary on every frame. So now we can flick back and forth and just see what's happening here. So now I'm going to move this up because I think it needs to be going from up to down. I'm starting to see a little bit of what the motion could look like now. I'm avoiding drawing some of the detail because I want to look at more of the bigger picture. So for things like the eyes, I'm not going zooming in or anything for now, but I will do later probably. Okay, so now I've done that frame roughly, I'm going to go to the after frame. So this is after my initial storyboard, and we're going to see what we can find. This to me is going to be the more interesting one because the legs are going to start to swing forwards, and this body is going to curl up a little bit. It's a fairly subtle movement because I want a lot of I want there to be a lot of movement of the ground rushing by, but the character itself is only going to be moving quite slowly because he's in mid-swing. In scenes like this, it can be quite easy to look at the motion and observe it because we are looking at it from a side-on angle, so we can be very acutely aware of what rate everything is moving. So that's quite easy in one of these scenes. Where it gets difficult is where you put perspective in, because then it can be harder to judge how fast something is moving if it's coming away from you or towards you. So yeah, that's something to consider for this. I want to have him go up faster. So if you think of a swing, the I'll draw a diagram quickly. So if we have a circle like this, hold on. So if we have a circle a bit like this, what I'm thinking in my head is that when it goes round, if you look at this area here, if it's turning at a normal rate, if you look at the up down bit, it goes it curves, so it slows down progressively and then it speeds up exponentially here, if you're just looking at the up and down. So that's what I'm thinking right now. That's what's going through my head for this, and that's why I've decided for the swing on the upside is going to move much faster. It's going to start to just go up quite a lot. So we are going to just take in the proportions again of the torso and the legs, so that they don't swing around too much, like the proportions kind of roughly stay on model. Okay, so here we have it go steeply upwards. So to emphasize the speed of the up-down swing, we're going to prolong the bottom part of the swing for as long as we can. We're able to now flick between them using onion skin as well, and this is where you start to fiddle about with them until they start to feel right. And only when the poses themselves and the relationship between the poses, when they start to feel really good and they seem to work, then you go into in-betweening. So I wouldn't recommend going into in-betweening before that stage. Focus on what you've got first, and then once you can't see anything else you can change about them, then go into in-betweening. So right now I'm just refining them, improving the relationship between one another, trying to space it out as best I can, and then I will in between them. And once they're in between, then you get even more of a feel for how the motion is doing, so you're able to edit them even more, and then you're able to in between those in betweens, and then again you get that extra bit of information in there. So that's the process that I like to work with, and I'll demonstrate it now. So now I'm going to be continuing to edit these poses by flicking through them and just seeing what's wrong with them. Okay, I've tinkered around with it a little bit, and I've decided that I need a bit more information revealed to me, so I'm going to go into my first stage of in-betweening, and from there as soon as I've in-betweened it, I'll be able to scrub through it and get another feel for it and have a more accurate idea of what I should be moving about. So here goes the first stage of in-betweening. So I'm going to put in-between frames here. So these are my blank keyframes, and I'm going to draw in between. I'm going to start off with a fairly standard in between, straight in between the two poses, but then I might tweak things about as I see fit. Okay, so I've done the extra in-betweens, and now I'm just scrubbing through and creating the refining process that happens after you in-between. So if you think of the steps again, it's like you start with the before and after of the sketch that you've done, then you do the refinement of the before and after and the main sketch, then you do your first round of in-betweens, refinement, in-betweens, refinement, in-betweens, refinement, and so on. You can do this all the way down to 24 frames per second if you like. I'm going to probably do it down to 2s, which is 12 frames per second, because after that it just takes a long time, and the results get less and less impressive. So now part of the refinement is things like this. You'll notice that certain keyframes that you've drawn before don't properly follow the in-between pattern, so they don't fully follow the path of motion. If we look at this, this foot here, I'm gonna just highlight it. This foot here is out of whack with this foot and this foot on the frames before and after. So we just want to tweak it to realign this foot so that it follows a nice smooth path of motion. This isn't always the case. If you want things to look a bit erratic and moving all over the place, then you might not want to do this. Or if you're working with very fast motion, then you don't have to make it flow. But part of the question I get asked all the time is, how do I make things flow? One of the answers to that is that you have to do a lot of this refining process, which is putting things like this back into the path of motion where they should be. So I just, one of the easiest ways is just to use the free transform tool and move it like that. And then the result of that over time, if you do enough of them, is that it starts to, everything follows in arcs, and then it starts to look really nice and flowy. So there's one of my secrets right there for how I create a nice smooth motion, because a lot of you seem to have problems with having things a bit jerky and jaggedy. So this is one of those answers that's really quick and simple, but you have to enforce it a lot, and it does take a bit of extra time. Anyway, I'm going to carry on with this refining process. So you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm actually editing the initial drawing that we started out with to further support the animation that I've done around it. So there's no reason why you can't, after animating a little bit, make certain alterations to your initial pose to help to support the animation, especially if you're like me and what you've done is you've created a backup of that pose, because you might want to keep that pose for later. I might use it as a thumbnail or something like that, and that's why it's always nice to keep backups of everything. So yeah, I'm now kind of making slight alterations to this one so that it's consistent with the other drawings that I've made, and that's fine to do. Okay, I'm happy with that, so I'm going to move on to the next stage of in-betweening. So between each keyframe, put a little in-between, and rinse and repeat, I guess. And in this stage, we're going to see the clothing get a lot more exciting because we're able to introduce the flutter now properly. Because the flutter works so fast, if you think about wind, a gusty wind flowing through a jacket or something, it moves extremely fast. So we're only able to show that on a very high frame rate, like 24 frames per second. So now we're reaching that 24 frames per second, 12 frames per second, or on some of them. We're going to start to see that happening, and it's going to look really nice. But it's only going to take full effect once we have reached 24 frames per second. So you can see I'm doing a nifty little trick here with the face. As you know, the face contains a lot of detail and it can be difficult to get that detail just right. So I am actually doing a little trick. I take the lasso tool here, copy an area of the face, paste it onto the next one, position it correctly, and go from there. And that's just a time saver, and it also can really increase the quality in the end. You're able to keep the face consistent, and when you're drawing the in-betweens, it can be really difficult to keep the areas of the face consistent because the proportions can just move slightly, and when they move slightly it can look off. So I like to perfect it just by copying and pasting the same face on. I won't do that for every face. It's mainly for the face frames which are very close together, which need to be precise because people will be able to see the mistakes in those circumstances. So I'm going to quickly just go through how I build an in-between, because you might be wondering that depending on what skill level you're on. So let's highlight something here. Right now I'm focusing on this foot that's dragging behind, and you got to start somewhere, right? And I'm starting with the sole of the foot. So I look at the sole there and the sole here, and because it's kind of on a side view, it's quite nice and simple, straightforward. You're not dealing with perspective at all. So we're going to see how to in between that. So let's just get a different color and just draw dotted lines from here to here. What's the middle distance between these two lines? It's about here, I mean, give or take. And then the middle distance between these two lines is about here, give or take. So now we join them up, and that's about where our in-between is going to go. So then we can put that in here as our in-between. Now, this might seem really simple, but you can take this to almost any situation in animation and it will work. And it's the basis on which all animators do their in-betweens. So very simple but very powerful. That's basically breaking down how an animator stitches one in-betweens, one drawing to another. It's just the process of doing that over and over again in different situations. So just in case some of you didn't know how to do that, that's what I'm doing right now. And so we do that for almost every line. The difference is that where it gets a bit tricky is where you bring in arcs. So you've got to think as well that generally if it's human or animal or natural in any way, it's going to follow an arc. So you've got to kind of take that into consideration as well. So you'll see that this item here of hold on, come on, this item this item here is kind of attached to the foot, and so it kind of obeys the foot first, and so it doesn't follow directly in between, but almost directly, but it kind of curves outwards like that. So it's kind of like, as well as thinking about just line for line, it's also the item as a whole and how it swivels and tilts and stuff. It's starting to come together now because we can see it's linking up, it's becoming more smooth, it's becoming easier to watch. So that's when you know you're getting there, is around when you can put the frames on 3s, and from there you kind of want to break it into 1s and 2s to really finish the job. But for projects where I have a time limit, I often leave them on 3s or even 4s and 5s, just because it's too difficult to in between all of that within a time frame, because you have to draw a lot. Anyway. Okay, so I've done the next round of in-betweens. It took ages because as you go through the stages, there becomes more and more in-betweens to do. So the workload gets more, but it becomes easier in a way because you don't have to think as much. Now the video's over, remember to go check out the link in the description so that you can fill out the survey and leave me suggestions for what we can offer you with Animator Guild when this Patreon page is launched. Alright, see you later.